10 years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura project, and Al-Mustafa Scouts is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.
كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي، كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي، كربلائي كربلائي، كن رفيقي كربلائي. بي حكاية الولاء حفلات كربلاء علمت شبابها كيف تحفظ الصلاة، علمت عن أولياء، عن شباب أوفياء أرخصوا مهر الدماء واشتروا عرض السماء. بالدماء وقعوا على الوصية، مهرهم رضا الأمير والزكية، يدخلون للجنان آمنين كوثرا يسقيهم الولي ريا. بالدماء وقعوا على الوصية، مهرهم رضا الأمير والزكية، يدخلون للجنان آمنين كوثرا يسقيهم الولي ريا. في العلاء في العلاء كن رفيقي كربلائي. في العلاء في العلاء كن رفيقي كربلائي. كن حسيني الولاء والثبات، عش حسيني الحياة للممات. كربلائي كربلائي كن رفيقي كربلائي. كربلائي كربلائي كن رفيقي كربلائي. كن كقاسم البطل، لا تمن بالأمل، فالفناء في الحسن أشهى من طعم العسل. كن كأكبر علي بالعطاء الأكمل، جود بكل ما لديك في محبة الولي. لا نبالي إن وقعنا في المنون.
ياسين والقرآن الحكيم، إنك لمن المرسلين.
Ali ibn Abi Talib, the daughter of Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra, the Lady of Light, the leader of the women of the universe, sister to Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, sister to Aba Abdullah, the master of the martyrs, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And finally, al-Masa'ib, the mother of tragedy. They brought her to Yazid, a captive, but she broke her chains and took revenge with her pure voice, the voice of Hussein. With her tongue, she would slaughter Bani Umayyah, tearing apart Yazid's throne with just her words. They cowered in fear as if in her shadow, Haydar himself had appeared. She said the world will never forget what happened, and the holy names of Ahlul Bayt will never be forgotten. So we say to you today, Ya Zainab, we say to you today, O daughter of Fatima, that we will never forget Hussein, we will never forget the Ahlul Bayt, and we will never forget you, Ya Zainab. Let us all raise our hands in dua together. اللهم عرفني نفسك فإنك إن لم تعرفني نفسك لم أعرف رسولك. اللهم عرفني رسولك فإنك إن لم تعرفني رسولك لم أعرف حجتك. اللهم عرفني حجتك فإنك إن لم تعرفني حجتك ضللت عن ديني. And with that, please help me welcome Samahat al-Sheikh Mahdi Rastani after a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعجل فرجه. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إذا السماء انشقت وأذنت لربها وحقت وإذا الأرض مدت وألقت ما فيها وتخلت وأذنت لربها وحقت. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli. The topic that we'll be discussing tonight, inshallah, is the difference between modern spirituality and Islamic spirituality. The reality is that spirituality has been a part of the life of the human being from thousands of years before Islam even emerged. In fact, it will be difficult to find a society and a time and a place where spirituality in some form and in some shape was not practiced. The idea of believing in a greater creator, in a belief in a greater power in this world, the idea of believing in some metaphysical beings has always accompanied the human being. Even if you were to go thousands of years before Islam, look into human beings who used to live in caves, historians have found drawings on those caves, seeing these people, speaking of in their own languages, through their drawings of a greater power, a greater God, metaphysical beings that they necessarily would not come into contact to on a physical level, but believed that those things existed. So spirituality has always been around with the human being, and the reality is, even today, with all of the technological progress that we have made, spirituality still plays an important role in the lives of many of the people around us. Sometimes you'll come across very famous people in society, celebrities even, who from a physical perspective, from a material perspective, they're all set, they don't need anything else in this life, and still sometimes they will speak about the importance of spirituality in their mental health, how it gives meaning to their life, and so on and so forth. And this is an interesting phenomenon, because the reality is the world that we're living in and societies as a whole are actually becoming less and less religious and more spiritual. And one might wonder, what is the difference between these two? I mean, if you're religious, doesn't that mean you're a spiritual person? Well, the reality is no. These two are quite different from each other. You will find a lot of people in life, and sometimes you and I come across people like this as well, who are very spiritual. They will engage in different spiritual acts, prayer, fasting, charity, so on and so forth, but they may not necessarily identify as religious individuals. If you were to go to them to hold them accountable to the letter of the law and say, well, this religion doesn't agree with what you're doing, they'll tell you, listen, I'm not a religious person. I am a spiritual person. And these two are fundamentally different from one another. When you look at the statistics, especially when it comes to the United States, you will find the number of people who attribute themselves to spirituality in general, spiritual individuals. This number is on the rise. The number of people who attribute themselves to organized religion and identify, for example, as Christian, is on the decline. Both of these are true at the same time. And so what you find is a phenomenon known as the phenomenon of the nuns. Nun, not spelled as N-U-N. Nun spelled as N-O-N-E. A person who doesn't necessarily attribute himself to any particular faith or religion. He's living his life, very spiritual individual, but not necessarily a religious individual. The statistics tell us that from the year 2007, moving up to 2023, in 2007, the number of Christians compared to nuns, yes, people who don't attribute to any particular faith, the ratio was a 5-to-1. Fast forward a number of years later, in today's world and in the United States, that number has dropped to the ratio of 2-to-1. That's a big difference. And so the world that we live in is moving more and more towards spirituality and more away from religion. The idea of attributing yourself to a religion is actually not the trendy thing nowadays. Being a spiritual person is actually very trendy. It's a very beautiful thing to do nowadays. Okay, so what does this mean for us? The reality is we have to see this spirituality that's becoming common within society and is also being practiced even within our own communities. Is this the spirituality that Islam wanted us to practice, or is this our own take, our own interpretation on spirituality? Because these two can fundamentally be very different from each other. Many of us, amongst our relatives, amongst our loved ones, might have come across people who identify as spiritual and not necessarily religious. This person might pray from time to time, but he never feels compelled to pray. He never feels like he has to pray. This person might fast from time to time, but never feels like he has to pray. There's no obligation. It's just a spiritual practice. If you do it, great. If you don't do it, that's fine too. And life moves on. Is this the spirituality that Islam prescribed for us or not? That is the discussion that we need to have. And the reason why we're having this discussion is not necessarily as it relates to society as a whole, but more specifically as it relates to you and I as Muslims and the way you and I practice our faith. Because this approach to spirituality, as we will discuss, is now seeping into our own communities. It's becoming the trendy thing to talk about Islam and talk about its spirituality, but not necessarily hold yourself accountable to the letter of the law. This is becoming a thing now, especially within our younger generation. This is growing. Tonight, inshallah, we want to delve into this topic, and you will see this discussion is the root to a lot of the issues that we see when it comes to practicing Islam properly. And in order to delve into this topic, we'll pose the following questions. Number one, with all of the technological progress that we have had over the number of years that have passed, the previous decades, with the advent of AI and everything else under the sun, what is the role of spirituality in our lives today? And do we still have a need for spirituality? Or is it the case, like some philosophers had said, coming into the 20th century, that God is dead? The role of God in the life of the human being is done now. Number two, what are the main differences between modern spirituality and the spirituality that Islam prescribes for you and I? Number three, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears 7 times at the beginning of Surah Ash-Shams, what point is He trying to make? And why does He swear 7 times to make this one point? Number four, when we practice our faith simply based on what does or doesn't feel spiritual to us, what types of problems are we opening ourselves up to? Number five, when you build spirituality and you do spiritual acts of worship in Islam, does it always feel spiritual in the moment? Or does it sometimes feel very difficult and not so spiritual at all? Number six, which student of Ayatollah Qadi was it who reached the highest level of spirituality simply by doing something that didn't feel spiritual at all, by showing patience to some of his relatives who were creating problems for him? And number seven, and finally, did the Ahlul Bayt ever tell us to practice our faith based on what feels or doesn't feel spiritual to us? Or did they present laws and rules and regulations to us and ask us to follow these rules and regulations? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Let us begin with the technological progress that we have made as human beings. Some things are happening in society around us. They're quite scary. Artificial intelligence is a scary thing. I don't know if you've thought about this. But we don't even know what the world is going to look like 5 years from now. Forget about 20 years, the next decade, the next millennia. Forget about that stuff. The next 5 years, we don't know what the world is going to look like. This is a reality. Technology is growing in a way that we never even imagined. We never even thought. But still, there's always a place for spirituality in our lives. There's always a need for spirituality in our lives. You see within society today, people who are very successful financially in every other way, sometimes they'll speak about this. That my life feels very empty without any sense of spirituality in it. There's no meaning and purpose to my life if there is no spirituality in my life. This is a good thing that the human being that is progressing at such a high speed technologically still feels the need for some form of spirituality to be present in his life. This is the good part. The bad part, however, is that nowadays anything can be considered spirituality, and any form of spirituality can be mixed with Islamic spirituality, with the way Islam wants you to be a spiritual individual. But the reality is, as we will demonstrate today, Islamic spirituality and the spirituality that is practiced in society today are very different from one another. They have a big contrast between the two. And today, inshallah, we will point out 3 major differences between the two. As we continue with the discussion is going to get more and more practical. The first difference is more foundational. The second one, a little less. The third one is the most practical of the differences. And we'll talk about the big issues that we have in our communities and how it stems from this misunderstanding that we have on the issue of spirituality. The first difference, let us begin from here. The first difference between Islamic spirituality and the spirituality you find is becoming trendy nowadays is this. If you go to the average person and you ask him, what does it mean you're a spiritual person? How does that mean you act in society, you play a role in society? They will tell you that because I am a spiritual person, the actions that I do are acts of kindness to humanity. This is a person who gives charity. This is a person who wants to bring a smile to the faces of other people, wants to be kind to other people, wants to be fair with other people. This is the picture we have of a good moral individual. Acts of kindness. These are all things that in Islam are also recommended. Yes? Nothing wrong with any of these. We need more of these in the world that we live in today. Okay, great. But here's the major difference. Difference number 1. In Islam, your spirituality doesn't start from the acts of kindness that you do to other people. Pay attention, it's very important. Your spirituality begins in Islam by removing your ego and weakening the ego. So what's the difference? It's the same thing? No, it's a big difference. In Islam, the acts of kindness that you do to other people has a foundation. That foundation is that you have removed your ego. So when God tells you to be kind to His servants, you submit yourself. You say, you told me to be kind, I'm going to be kind. You told me to be fair, I'm going to be fair. You told me to bring the smile to the face of this person, I'm going to try to bring a smile to the face of those who interact with me. There is a foundation to it. That foundation is submission. That foundation is removing and weakening your ego. Islam's approach, far more transformational to spirituality than the spirituality we find in today's society. In today's society, they'll tell you, Bibin, listen, be a spiritual person. So give some charity. Be nice to the people around you. Yes? Bring a smile to their face. These are all great things. But is anyone trying to change who you are fundamentally? Improve who you are fundamentally? Your foundation? No. There's no discussion on that. Islam's approach, far more transformational. Islam says, come here, I have to tell you something. When you were born with an ego. This ego of yours is going to get in your way every time you try to do something good. Every time you try to sacrifice, it's going to get in your way. Every time you want to compromise for your loved ones, it's going to get in your way. Every time you want to take a big step for other human beings, it's going to get in your way. First, we have to get rid of that ego. Look at Islam. So many acts of worship in Islam. More than half of them, maybe you can say, are not necessarily acts of kindness to another person. You say, Sheikh, I thought acts of kindness are very important in Islam. They are. But they're a piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. So as part of the acts of worship you do in Islam, on the nights of Qadr, you come to the majlis, in the program, you speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What kind of act of kindness is this to humanity? You're not giving charity, you're not volunteering, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And yet, the narrations will say, oh, this is so valuable, we're going to write down good deeds for you, big reward for you in heaven. But where's the act of kindness? There's no act of kindness, at least not directly to any person. Couldn't you be spending that time, instead of sitting in that majlis, going and giving charity to somebody else? Couldn't you have done that? You could have. But Islam told you, no, it's more important for you to be here. You go on Hajj, this big act of worship that we have, yes? One of the doors of heaven, we talked about this yesterday, is called the door of Hajj. Okay, I ask you, when you go for Hajj, what kind of act of kindness are you doing to other people? Maybe one of the rare places in all of Hajj that there is actually an act of kindness to other people is the qurbani that you do. Okay, when you're throwing stones at this column, some people throw stones as if shaitan's actually standing there. I saw one guy, he got so aggressive, almost killed shaitan. When you're throwing these stones at these columns and so on and so forth, are you doing an act of kindness for humanity? No. But Islam says if you don't do that, your faith is going to be in trouble. You're going to have issues. You have to go for Hajj. I come, I do dua, I do supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What kind of act of kindness am I doing to humanity, talking to my Lord? You're not doing any act of kindness to humanity. But Islam says this is very important. You go for ziyarah, are you doing an act of kindness to other people? No, not necessarily. But Islam says this is very important. Why are these things important? Because Islam doesn't see spirituality only built around the acts of kindness that you do to other people. Islam also sees spirituality about removing your ego. Because when you remove your ego, then your path to serve humanity is now completely open. Islam believes if you are able to weaken your ego, you will become a source of goodness for everybody in your life. Person who doesn't have an ego, his ego has been weakened, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, be generous, he'll be generous. God will tell him, be modest, be modest. God will tell him, go and help other people, he'll go help other people. You want to see this in action? You want to see who did the greatest act of service to humanity and how he was able to do it? It's the person we commemorate during these 10 days. Imam al-Hussein did the greatest act of kindness to humanity. In Ziyaratul Arba'in, what do we read? Oh Allah, he was the one who saved your servants from misguidance. Hayratil dhalala. Yes, this is what we read. How did Imam al-Hussein do the greatest act of humanity for humanity? How did he do this? Because he had no ego. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, you need to go into the middle of this desert, you have to bring your family with you, you have to bring Ali Akbar with you, you have to bring Ali Asqar with you, you have to bring your daughters with you, you have to do this, you have to go through all these pains. He said, yes, I'll do it. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, I like for you to be in this position. Done deal. Why? Because Imam al-Hussein doesn't have an ego. In Islam, the first step to spirituality is weakening that ego of yours. As long as you have that ego, you're not going to go far. Because anytime you want to do something, that ego is going to jump in there. This is why in Hajj, you do so many things. You're not doing act of kindness to humanity. What are you doing? You're doing something even more foundational. You're working on that ego of yours. The best form that you can see this, the best example of this is none but salat itself. Salat. This salat that the narrations say is the column to your faith. If you pull it, your whole faith falls down. The 10th night, we're going to talk about salat in detail. Okay, salat, when I pray, am I doing any act of kindness to other human beings? No, you're not. You're just standing there. You're doing some movements. It has its own meaning and so on and so forth. But you're not necessarily like helping other people. And yet Islam says this is the most important thing you could do. Why? Because when you pray, your ego takes a hit. That's why it's the most important thing. that you could do. Then when your ego is weak, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be kind to this person, you'll be kind to this person. Be generous here, you will be generous here. The moment your ego becomes weak, you become a source of goodness, not just in one or two ways, in hundreds of different ways, because there's nothing to stop you anymore. This is the first major difference between Islamic spirituality and the spirituality you hear of nowadays. Islamic spirituality is there to weaken your ego. Modern spirituality soothes your ego. That's the difference. It serves your ego. In Islam, no, we have to get rid of that ego. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears 7 times in Surah Ash-Shams. 7 times. I don't know if you've ever wanted to make a point and swore 7 times to make the point. We don't do this. Except for that one friend of yours, yeah? Who swears about everything. Wallahi, bro. Wallahi, he was like this. Wallahi, we went there, the sandwich was this big. Okay, Habibi, it was a sandwich. Why are you swearing? Wallahi. Wallahi, we went there and then everyone was shouting. Okay, why are you swearing? Everything has to be wallahi for him. Islam discourages this. You're not supposed to be swearing this often. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears how many times? 7 times. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. This 7 times. To make what point? To make this 1 point. 1 point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears 7 times to make this 1 point. When he gets all the way to the end, he says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. This soul of yours has negativity in it. You have to weed out those weeds. You have to weaken that ego of yours. Don't come to me and say, oh, well, I give charity, so I'm a spiritual person. That's your version of spirituality. In Islam, your ego is the problem. First, you got to work on that. And that's built into the acts of worship that we have. Salat, the most important of all of them. Other ones as well, but salat is the most important of all of them. How many times have you heard people say, why do you fast, brother? And then this guy walks in and says, we fast because it reminds us of the poor. Yes, that's one of the benefits of fasting. But that's not the most foundational reason why we fast. The Quran says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. I want to get rid of that ego of yours. That's why I want you to fast. Will you be reminded of the poor as an added benefit? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But the main purpose is what? The main purpose is that ego. That is the main problem. This is number 1. Let us move on to number 2. Recite a salawat, please. Number 2, which is a consequence of number 1, the second sign of modern spirituality, is that you never do anything out of obligation. It's always a choice. Do you want to do this? Yeah, maybe. Why do you want to do it? It feels good. In today's spirituality, spirituality is just a tool to make your life a little bit better. In today's spirituality, you're the main person in the story. In Islamic spirituality, God's the main person in the story. He's the main character. It's not about you. So this person is very spiritual. Does he ever feel compelled to pray? No. He will fast, but would he ever feel compelled to fast? No. Just depending on how he's feeling. If he likes to, he'll do it. If he doesn't like to, he won't do it. And you'll say, well, Sheikh, I've heard that worshiping God out of obligation is not the best thing. I've heard, because one time I was in this lecture and the speaker said that Imam Ali said there are 3 groups of people. Some of them worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the fear of hellfire. Some of them worship out of the love of heaven. And then there are some people, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He's worthy of worship. I heard that one is the best one, so I think it's not so good for me to worship God out of obligation anyways. I think that's very spiritual. No, you misunderstood. Inshallah, on the 9th night, when we talk about should we fear God, we're going to talk about this. What does it mean to worship God out of obligation and out of fearing Him and out of accountability? This is again a trendy thing. I don't want to worship God out of fear. I don't want to worship out of God because I feel like I have to. If this wasn't such a great thing, then how come the Ahl Bayt when they speak of themselves, they speak of themselves fearing God. I'm just planting the seed. The 9th night, we're going to come back to this discussion. In Surah Al-Insan, this story we've heard many times growing up. Yes? 3 days, the needy come to the door. Every night, the family gives from their food. Yes? What does the Quran say? وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, because they do this, because they are fearful of يَوْمًا عَبُوسًا قَمْطَرِيرًا. They are fearful of the day of judgment. I thought it's spiritual not to worship out of fear. Yes, this is a misunderstanding you had. We have to discuss this, inshallah. This is the second difference. I do good things not out of obligation, because I choose to. This is not Islamic spirituality. Let us move on to number 3, and this is the most practical. Because this person at the first level has an ego, at the second level doesn't feel any obligation, so that ego always remains. You know what the third difference is between Islamic spirituality and what we find today in society? When God is no longer the main person in this picture, and you're the one who's deciding to be spiritual just on your own, because it makes your day a better day. This is the third one. And this one opens a can of worms like none other. Now you're spiritual, so how do you decide what to do in your day-to-day life? You go based off of what feels spiritual to you, not based on what God told you to do. What's the problem with this? The problem with this is now anyone can practice the religion any which way they like. You can pick and choose now. What makes you feel spiritual? Just do that. So now this person is planning a wedding. I'll give you some real examples, yeah? This person is planning a wedding. In this wedding, every sin you can possibly think of is going to happen. All sorts of sins. These men are going to mix with the women are going to mix with the men. There's haram music being played. Not all music is haram. We're going to discuss this, inshallah. But all these sins are happening. Yeah? But this person's fine with it. You know why? Because on the wedding card, it said, وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. On the wedding card, it said, we created you in pairs. This is a verse of the Quran. So now in the wedding, all sorts of sins are happening, but it feels spiritual. It feels very divine. It feels very holy. In this wedding, all things are happening. I've heard even sometimes Muslim weddings, na'udhu billah, there's alcohol, so on and so forth. Yes? All of this is happening. But this person has no problem with it. Why? Because at the beginning we had a sheikh come in. So the sheikh made it Islamic. It feels spiritual to us. It feels very holy. I don't dispute that. It does feel holy. It feels spiritual. But Islamic spirituality is not about what feels spiritual. This is the thing. It's not about that. It's about the law. Are you practicing the law or not? So then this other person comes, he says, listen, Ramadan is around. I love Ramadan. Ramadan is wonderful. The spiritual atmosphere, all of this kind of stuff, it's wonderful. I love it. Everyone, festivals, all these things. These are all great things, by the way. These are all wonderful things. This isn't the problem. The problem is what I'm going to get to. Yes? Okay, Ramadan is wonderful. It feels amazing. I love fasting. So he fasts. She fasts. And then you're like, okay, so by the way, do you pray 5 times a day? Because that's kind of more important than fasting even, believe it or not. As important as fasting is, salat is more important. Then this person all of a sudden is like, no, not really. Why? Because when she fasts, she feels spiritual. But then when she has to pray 5 times a day, it doesn't feel spiritual to her. So now she's not going to do that. You see the can of worms we've opened now? Anything you put your hands on, I have to see if it feels spiritual to me. Otherwise, I'm not necessarily going to practice it. This person, Muharram comes around, he attends 10 majalis. Some places, alhamdulillah, the number is just going higher and higher. 12, 13, 14, 15 nights. Yes? He comes all the nights. Makes no change in his life at all. Nothing. Same person. You're like, but that's not what you're supposed to. He says, but it feels spiritual. We all come, we wear black, we're sitting in this place, it feels spiritual. Hold on to this principle. In Islam, your spirituality is not based off of doing what feels or doesn't feel spiritual. That's a can of worms you're opening. It's based on servitude, it's based on submission. It's God told me to do this, so I'm doing it. As simple as that. Otherwise, if you get into what feels spiritual, that's going to differ from every single person here. Everyone has their own understanding of what feels spiritual to them. This auntie or uncle is in Dua Kumail, they're reciting, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabb. Then they just lean over to the other person who's walking by. They say, this one, she has issues with her husband. Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabbi, Ya Rabb. You say, but this is not, we're not supposed to be doing that. She says, what, it feels spiritual. She's right, it does feel spiritual. But what feels or doesn't feel spiritual is not the way we practice this faith. Now you open yourself up to a lot of other issues, big issues. I'll give you other examples. Now you'll have this, and this is not a hypothetical situation, this is a real situation. You're all aware of these types of situations nowadays. Now this person comes and says, listen, I'm a very spiritual person. I pray, I fast, yes, I give charity, I do everything. Hajj, whatever, name it, I'll do it. Except I also experience, yes, same-sex attractions. And I act on it. That's the lifestyle that I have, yes. I have adopted for myself. Everything else this person does. But they have these tendencies and these inclinations. Having the tendencies and inclinations is not the problem. Acting on them. But this person says, listen, it's not a big deal. I'm the same spiritual person I was before. From the perspective of that person, they feel very spiritual. Now you might sit there and say, no, that's a problem. Islam doesn't allow this. Well, since one was practicing Islam about what the letter of the law says, you were saying all the time, it's about what makes you feel spiritual. Hope for this person, this is what feels spiritual. See what you opened yourself up to? You open yourself up to selective practice of the religion. Everyone gets to pick and choose now which part of Islam they want and which part of Islam they want to completely disagree and completely disregard and completely ignore. Because what? Because these ones make him feel spiritual. The other ones don't make him feel spiritual. This is a problem. This is a can of worms that we have opened. I want to make a very important disclaimer here. What we're talking about here and what we're criticizing here is not referring to the person who understands he's at fault for practicing some parts of the religion and disregarding other aspects of the religion. The one who admits this and understands this is not what we're criticizing here. That person says, I know sometimes I'm supposed to do a better job with this area. It's difficult for me. I'm working on it. I'm struggling. I'm on a journey. I'm trying to get there. Wonderful. I'm in that group myself. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the person who assumes and is satisfied with picking and choosing with Islam. This is the idea we're talking about, yes? Otherwise, all of us might struggle with a particular area of Islam. You're struggling, okay, there's no problem. You admit that you're struggling. I know I'm supposed to cover up. It's difficult for me. I'm trying, okay. I know I'm supposed to pray 5 times a day. I'm struggling, I'm trying to, okay, wonderful, you're on your way. This is not for you. This is for the one who sits there and is satisfied and says, yeah, I pick and choose because this one makes me feel spiritual. This one doesn't make me feel spiritual. No, you just open yourself up to a lot of issues that you're going to have to deal with. Let us get into this a little bit deeper. Sometimes you'll find people, influencers, either a male influencer who's no longer practicing, female influencer, let's say for example, takes off her hijab. Okay, why is this happening? Sometimes people get very harsh and, this person is evil and this person had an agenda. And I don't agree with that approach. At least most scenarios, that's not the case. It's actually a very innocent approach. But at the same time, Islam disagrees with it. You know what this person will tell you? When I was growing up, this is the way I felt spiritual, was covering up and so on and so forth. After a while, I don't connect with God this way anymore. I don't feel anything. It feels like just an extra thing I have on my head. That's the logic. Now, based on that logic, yes, that's the conclusion you're going to come to. The problem is Islam doesn't agree with that logic. Oh, this person had an agenda. She did this and she did. No, listen to her. See what she's saying. It's actually a very innocent approach. Again, Islam disagrees with it, but it's a very innocent approach. Before I felt like this is very spiritual. Now I don't feel like I connect with God in this way. Yeah, if you practice religion based on what makes you feel spiritual and what doesn't make you feel spiritual, yeah, absolutely. This is how you're going to practice religion. Except this is not what Islam taught us. This is the issue. So let us be very clear. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, you will do something very spiritual, but you won't feel any spirituality at all. You just feel very normal. Let me take it a step further. Sometimes you will do something very spiritual. Not only will it not feel neutral, it will feel very difficult, very painful in the moment. But in reality, what you just did was the most spiritual thing you could possibly do. So this young man comes into society. Everything within society is telling him to engage with the opposite gender, to look at things he's not supposed to look at. And then with all of his might and his willpower, he says no to that. When he says no to that, do you think that feels spiritual in the moment? Ask any young man. Doesn't feel spiritual. This young woman, everything in society is telling her to come into society and reveal more of herself to society. Everyone is telling her the less you cover, the better. Now she decides, no, because I'm a servant, I want to obey God, I'm not doing it. In that moment, does this feel spiritual? No, not necessarily. It feels difficult. Sometimes it even feels painful. It's painstaking. But she just took one of the greatest steps towards spirituality in her life. It's not necessarily about how you feel. When your mother comes in the house, says the same thing for the 7th time because you didn't do it the first 6 times. Because she has a different take on life. Because she has a different opinion about how you're living your life. Right or wrong, whatever the case might be. Yes? And in that moment, you want to yell back, God forbid. And you want to lose your cool. But you swallow that anger. You do kadhmul ghayz. This is literally the wording of the Quran. Yes, kadhm, because it's so difficult. You swallow this anger of yours. You hold back. Does that feel spiritual in the moment? I don't know about you. It doesn't feel spiritual to me. It feels very difficult. It's not easy at all. One of the students of Ayatollah Qadi, this famous teacher of Irfan, he says, his own students asked him one time, they said, listen, what did you do that slowly, you became who you became? Yes? And it appears as though he shared this with his student and told him not to tell until after he had left this world. Because these greats wouldn't really share these things about their lives. You reached this highest level of spirituality. How did you reach this highest level of spirituality? He said, you know what happened? Let me tell you. I was married. We had a family. I had a business. The business was not going well. Things were very difficult. There's a hard time financially. I had a mother-in-law. This is the mother of his wife. She was very harsh with her tone. And when things weren't going so well, she would add to that. She just didn't like me. So every time I would come home in the heat of the city where I was living, sweating already from whatever work I was doing and coming back with a little bit of money that we can use to provide for our family, I would come back and then she would start yell at me, oh, look at what you've done to my daughter, what kind of life is this, all of this kind of stuff. Every time I came in, it was so difficult for me to even deal with this. But because financially we couldn't afford it, I couldn't move out either. This is the particular situation that this person was in. This is not necessarily recommended, but this was the situation he was in. He had no other option. He said, one of these times I came home, it was really, really hot. When I came home, I'm sweating. I just came from work. Obviously, I didn't make a lot of money. I'm already struggling in my life. I came home, I saw my mother-in-law is sitting there in shade. She's sitting under the shade. She's enjoying herself, so on and so forth. Everything. She saw me, she started yelling. I said, you know what? I can't discuss anything with her because she doesn't listen. He said, you know what? I'll just move up, go up to the upper units where we live. I went up there, she continued screaming. He said, you know what? I didn't know what to do. I had two options. Either I could start yelling back, getting disrespectful, doing this or doing that. He said, I decided, you know what? Instead of doing that, I'm just going to leave the house half an hour, and then I'll come back. Hopefully things have calmed down. He said, in that moment when I was leaving the house, it was so extremely difficult for me because she was saying things that were cutting very deep. But because I knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants this from me, I decided I'll just be patient. He said, when I left the house, all of a sudden I saw my body and my soul started to separate from one another. My soul is up here looking down on myself walking. I went back to the house because I realized the patience I showed in those moments is what got me this far. Now that patience that this student of Ayatul Qadi is showing, does it feel wonderful and spiritual in the moment? No, it doesn't feel spiritual in the moment at all. But it's about submission. It's about serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not the main character in this story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the main character in this story. Stop making it about yourself. Stop sitting there and saying, well, I don't know if this feels spiritual. Let me tell you from right now. When you go on the airplane and the airplane is flying and you have to get up and pray in the back of the airplane in this little squished up area and everyone's looking at you weird, like, why are you even doing it? It's not going to feel spiritual. There, I told you. When your friends are doing something else and you know it's haram and you have to be the odd one and the weird one and you have to be like, listen, I can't do this. It's not going to feel spiritual. But trust me, that moment is a very spiritual moment. You're building a lot of spirituality in that moment. Yes, inshallah, with consistency, you might reach a point where now doing the right thing will also feel good to you as well. That's further down the road. But for you and I speak of myself, a person who's a sinner, one day I obey God, the other day I'm disobeying God, one day I'm listening to Him, the other day I'm not listening to Him. When I do the right thing, I'm not automatically going to feel spiritual. Stop making that the criteria. Do the right thing, and inshallah with consistency, the feelings, the emotions, those will also come. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from becoming those who pick and choose when it comes to Islam and only choose those aspects that are more pleasing to themselves rather than choosing what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, and especially the marhumin and the marhumat of the sponsors of tonight's program, with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you, Sheikh Mehdi, for that wonderful lecture. I'd like to remind everyone of the first Q&A session with Sheikh Mehdi this Saturday, right before the English program, starting at 6:30 p.m. inshallah. The session will be open for both brothers and sisters. And if you'd like to submit a question beforehand, please check our social media pages for the link to do so. We'd also like to remind everyone of the Al-Qasim Youth Contest and the Legacy of Zainab Scholarship Fund. If you're interested, you can find more information on our social media pages or on our website at ashuraproject.org. And now, I'd like to once again ask everyone to close their eyes, open their hearts, and embark on a short journey with me to the sacred land of Karbala, to Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, with a short poem titled The Stars Weep, written by my dear brother Nuri Sarda. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How empty the night has become when even the moon is alone. How empty the night has become when even the moon is alone. And the tents have become empty, and our men are just flesh and bone. The stars weep for me together, for I have not a single brother. My son's fallen on the desert. I stand as a sonless mother. My hands fallen in the desert as my flag no longer flutters. Whatever hearts are left beating, in the burning tents they shatter. My nephew also lies fallen. How I wail upon Qasim. I see on his lifeless body the bloody turban of Hassan. As the fire is still burning, I see Hussein's daughters running. As the devils would sack our tents, Ruqayya cries, her ear bleeding. My brother's voice has gone silent, as upon him angels lament. My brother's voice has gone silent, as upon him angels lament. I will never hear him again, as he lies there with his back bent. I say to myself, O Zainab, they're in need of your leadership. I say to myself, O Zainab, they're in need of your leadership. Wipe the blood off your abaya. On your sorrow, hold a firm grip. The road is long, but what's longer will be the days that you'll lament. So become like Ali's mountain and rescue the girls from the tents. Become like Ali's mountain and rescue the girls from the tents. Brothers and sisters, please help me welcome Brother Hassan Bazoon after a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام على الحسين الشهيد بكربلاء. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله، وعلى آلك المظلومين. يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا بابا نجاة الأمة. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah. May the peace of Allah be upon you, as you are His vast mercy and the salvation of this ummah. مظلوم يا حسين غريب يا حسين شهيد يا حسين. Together. A stranger you were in Karbala, ya thirsty you were in Karbala, ya martyred you fell in Karbala, ya may the peace of Allah be upon you and your honorable family who stood with you and died by your side in Karbala. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله حسين مني وأنا من حسين أحب الله من أحب حسينا. The Holy Prophet said, Hussein is of me and I am of Hussein. Allah loves the one who loves Hussein. Hussein, your love is the heart's remedy. Hussein, your name is the heart's melody. Forever in our hearts is a burning flame that graces life in the name of Hussein. جميعا together. Hussein, 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 Hussein. Yes, it's narrated that Imam Hussein alayhi salam was asked before he arrived in Karbala about his journey, and he said, Sha Allah an yarani qatila wa sha Allah an yarahunna sabaya. The Imam said, Allah's will is that I am killed, and His will is that the woman with me will be taken captive. In Karbala, just like there was a stance and a mission for the Imam and the men with him, there was also a stance and a mission for the women of that holy caravan. When Hur and his unit forced the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam to stop in Karbala, when they initially met them, a commotion ensued and a small confrontation between the two groups took place. When the women and the children in the caravan of the Imam saw this, they became scared and fear entered their hearts in that situation. But Sayyidi ya Aba Abdullah, Mawlaya ya Hussein, at that time you were still alive. Al-Abbas was alive, Ali al-Akbar was alive, Al-Qasim was alive, and all your companions were still with you. The fierce warriors, they're still with you. The children and the women were not thirsty at that point. I ask you, if they became frightened on that day, how must have they felt on the evening of the 10th day after the massacre? It was all said and done. What was that feeling after you were slain, along with Abbas and Qasim and Ali al-Akbar and all of the companions? How did the orphans feel when they called for their protectors and their defenders, but only heard the terrifying screams of Yazid's soldiers ransacking your camp and burning their tents as they hid within them? Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya Aba Abdullah, how did your daughter Sukaina feel when she saw your severed body on the scorching sands of Karbala? Let's look at this instance before Imam Hussein alayhi salam entered the battlefield. This is after all the companions had been martyred and all of his men from his holy household had been martyred, and he was alone. He saw his daughter Sukaina weeping. He's getting ready to leave for the last time. He calls her over. He embraces her. She said, "Father, هل استسلمت للموت? Father Hussein, have you surrendered to death?" He says, "What option is left? And I have no one to help me or any supporter to rise with me. Ya Sukaina, know that you will have Allah's support and protection in this life and the hereafter. So be patient over Allah's decree and do not complain, for this world will come to an end, and only the hereafter will remain." Ya Sukaina, the land of Karbala is harsh and cruel. Ya Sukaina, I bid you farewell before my final duel. Soon my body will fall, oh precious jewel. But even if my body falls and is trampled by hoofs, my heart will always be with you. Yes, bidding farewell to the women was another difficult task for the Imam alayhi salam. And that day was very difficult in everything, in every hour and every minute. But after the Imam was killed and after the Ashab was killed, after the Imam was killed in particular, Sayyida Zainab's heart was broken and she ran towards the battlefield when she saw the horse of Imam Hussein alayhi salam returning without a rider, without the Imam sitting on the horse. She began to cry and call his name, and she ran towards the battlefield. Then she stood and she turned towards Medina. Why, ya Zainab? What's in Medina, ya Zainab? She turned towards the grave of Rasulullah. Ya Muhammadah, صلى عليك مليك السماء، هذا حسينك بالعراء مرمل الدماء مقطع الأعضاء. يا رسول الله, This is Hussein, covered with blood and sand, limbs torn, stripped of his amama and his clothes, beheaded from the spine, and your daughters are to be taken captive. She complained to Rasulullah, but she didn't have time to stop. She had to run back to the tents towards the camp of her brother. As the enemies began burning the tents, she ran back to gather the orphans. Tents burning one after another. Zainab runs from one orphan to another. Your daughters would hide together without you and without Abbas. In fear they called, "Where are you, Father?" They saw the sand stained in red color. They saw your head and their heart in pain fluttered. Come see, they hit us after your departure. Come loosen these shackles, O thirsty martyr. From Karbala we'll be dragged together, but your name in our hearts will stay alive. Some narrations say that after the battle settled and the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was left over the sands, Sayyida Sukaina, they were still in Karbala. They hadn't taken them to Kufa yet. One narration says that Sayyida Sukaina looked for her father, searching between maimed bodies. But how can she find her father Hussein and his head is severed from his body? Eventually she finds him. I ask you, if a daughter was to find her father in the same way that Sayyida Sukaina found Imam Hussein, how would she feel? Baba Hussein, Baba Hussein, I came looking for you in aching dread. Baba Hussein, I struggled to find you without your head. I searched between bodies torn by blades, covered in sand and blood-colored shades. Then my heart, what happens? Then my heart said, look for the body with all the spears, with all the arrows, with all your fears. And here I came so I can spill my tears. I fear that I'll be taken to Kufa tomorrow, shackled and bruised, dressed in my sorrow. I fear that when we call you to push the enemies away, you will not rise Father Hussein, Baba Hussein, in Karbala thirsty you'll stay. One more tragic instance in our majlis tonight. After the 10th of Muharram, when the army of Yazid wanted to take the women and the children captives, they rounded them up. Then they walked them between the bodies in the battlefield. Then they brought them to the camels. They wanted to help them get on the camels. Sayyida Zainab yelled at them. She said, "Stop! Don't you dare touch the daughters of Muhammad. I will help them." Then Sayyida Zainab and Kulthum helped the rest of the family until only both of them remained. Sayyida Zainab, the narration says, looked at Kulthum. She says, "Come, Kulthum," her sister, "come, let me help you." So Kulthum asks her, "Who's going to help you? Get up if you help me, ya Zainab." And the poet paints a picture here as if Sayyida Zainab, what does she do when she's asked that question? She looks towards the Euphrates. For who? Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, خويا ما انت اللي جبتني. يا عباس، يا عباس، يا عباس، Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, her heart ever so painfully cried. Did you forget you've always guarded my side? Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, don't sleep near the river. Rise, bring your sword, come help us and break these ties. Ya Abbas, I am Zainab, your sister. I am Zainab calling you, tears in my eyes. And a hypothetical response from Abu Fadl, Ya Zainab, Ya Zainab, my eyes by an arrow were forced shut. Ya Zainab, my hands were severed and my body cut. Forgive me, sister, I long to rise, but next to the Euphrates, thirsty I shall remain. أنعم جوابا يا حسين، أما ترى شمر الخنا بالصوت هشم أضلعي. يا الله، يا الله، يا الله، يا الله. We ask you and call upon you by your greatest of names, the mightiest, the most honorable, to send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that you accept of us our worship. We ask that you send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. We ask you by Hussein the martyr and his mother and father, whoever was in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them, in particular those who have requested that we do dua on their behalf. We ask you, whoever in this gathering of ours and is sick or has a sick family member, that you heal them and cure their ailments. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, and that you hasten the return of our beloved 12th Imam, Al-Imam Imam al-Mahdi عجل الله تعالى فرجه, and that you write our names amongst his supporters and aiders. We ask that you protect our scholars and maraja and protect the Muslim Ummah against evildoers. May the peace of Allah be upon the noble Hussein, the children of Hussein, and the family of Hussein. May the peace of Allah be upon the noble Abbas and the honorable Zainab. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس أخي الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء ومن مات على ولاية مولانا علي بن أبي طالب، لا سيما أرواح أموات القائمين على هذا المجلس والحضور. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
10 years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura project and Al-Mustafa Scouts, is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.